Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Dr. Ashley Blackington, a board certified occupational therapist, founder, and storyteller at the intersection of caregiving, technology, and culture. She is the creator of Dovetail, a CareTech platform that launched in July 2025 to help family caregivers organize care, streamline communication, and build sustainable networks. She also hosts And Both, a podcast that brings the emotional realities of caregiving and motherhood into the open through raw, thoughtful conversations. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. You are the first guest that we are interviewing that's in the care tech sector. So I think it'll be so fun to just chat about you and everything that you've been building so far.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. We're kind of not a hidden gem, but we're growing. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off with that by having you share more about yourself and what you're building at Dovetail.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, I'm an OT by training, and I have done for the last little while. All of the dates are kind of fun, like an idea versus a build versus a whatever. But it has been this journey to try and integrate my clinical experience, my caregiving experience, my private practice experience in a way that creates a platform that really helps family caregivers. So, all of this started with my experience working in the hospital, being part of a team of therapists and clinicians that were helping patients and their families move through the process of rehab.
Hmm.
And then the goal was to have them go home. But what I saw over and over again in those settings were that, a family member meets with me and they met with five other people in five other disciplines, and they're handed all of this information, all of this education, all of these logistics. But you're not just handing it to someone who has been like waiting in the wings to like have something to do, right? Like these people already generally have a very packed life. And so when you think about adding more to someone's plate, the response was never, yay, I've been waiting for this. It's always like, how am I going to fit all of this together? And the journey was from that through to private practice where I did this in homes with families, really getting into the nitty-gritty of what aging in place looks like, to community-based care and conversations that I had through the podcast with other parents and caregivers, was how do we really smooth out as much friction as possible when it comes to the things that really bog down caregiving, bog down the ability to create effective care networks and get people to a place where they're feeling like this is more of a well-oiled machine and less of a like nails on a chalkboard experience, for that. So that's what we're
Oh,
building.
amazing. And I love that, like you said, you took all of the different like components that you had experience in with the clinical caregiving and practice and found a way to tie it together. And especially knowing that the sandwich generation is really big right now, it seems like with what you're building at Dovetail is especially crucial for the people who are still taking care of young kids, but now potentially taking care of older parents, and being able to just juggle it all with everything else they have going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. The sandwich generation is booming. The statistic, right, 10,000 people a day are turning 65 in this country, and will until 2030. The other end of that statistic is that that's been happening since 2010. So when I was in
Mm.
graduate school, they were saying there's this wave of people that are going to be turning 65. This is going to change what healthcare looks like. This is going to change what reimbursement looks like. This is going to change how we talk about caregiving. And I remember being, in my 20s thinking, "Oh wow, this is something that's going to be huge. Holy cow, we have to like start to build." And nothing really happened.
Hmm.
The conversation around what it means to manage caregiving and your life didn't really rise to the top until the pandemic. People
Yeah.
people sort of really suffered in silence for a long time with this. And then when the pandemic happened and everybody was confronted with the reality of you can't outsource if there's no one to outsource to, people were pulling their family members out of facilities because of all of the things that were going on there. So
Mhm.
really, the conversation around this has always been bubbling under the surface, but now it was right out in the open. And there's also too other just kind of, I don't know, it's not sad, but just shocking things. Like 50% of caregivers in the US don't identify as caregivers. And the
Yeah.
national, there's been all of these big studies that have come out over the last couple of years. The I can't think of the name of it right now. The National Alliance for Caregivers, they just released a study saying that there's 63 million caregivers in the US. So if you apply 50% to 63 million, we're at over 100 million, and that's one in three people in this country
Oh
is a
my
caregiver.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some regard, not necessarily a sandwich caregiver, but that person is a caregiver in some regard. And then you layer on sandwich caregiving and a lack of infrastructure for caregivers, you're really going down the rabbit hole to a squirrely place pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And another challenging thing that I've read about that I'm wondering if Dovetail somehow like supports or provides guidance on is just the financial impact of being a caregiver. I think what sometimes happens is people end up becoming a caregiver and they're like, oh my gosh, my parent or whoever it might be doesn't have the funds necessarily to pay for their own care, and now I'm taking on that burden, or me and my siblings are taking on that burden. And so I'd love to
Mhm.
hear more about that perspective and if that's something you guide Dovetail's users through.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is on the horizon for us. And I think that it's a incredibly valid point because a lot of times our introduction into caregiving it's not gradual, right? It's like learning to
Mhm.
swim when they used to throw people off the pool. That's what happens is you get a phone call, there's an emergency, and you say, you're the one who answers the phone or whoever it is, and they say, yeah, sure, no problem, I'll help. And
Mhm.
there's not a lot of preparation that goes into it. There's the conversations around finances when it comes to parents or loved ones is like still a really hard topic to address. And so it's getting these things out in the open. My private practice was all built around navigating these conversations. When I left the hospital and started working on my own, I was in people's homes because that's what I really love to do is how do we solve the problems that are here, the ones that are tailored
Mhm.
specifically to you, and how do we make sure that, all of the logistics around going through your day, getting in and out of the bathroom, feeding yourself, getting in and out of the house, all of that stuff. I really thought going into it very naively that that was going to be the vast majority of what I was going to focus on was just helping people with the grab bars and all of that stuff. 80% plus of that role was helping families have these conversations. One of the big one that nobody wants to talk about is money. And then the
Mhm.
other is just general assistance because there is so much emphasis on individualism and there's so much emphasis on not being reliant on other people in this country that people are so scared to have these conversations. So for a aging adult, they wait. Because you think if I ask them for help with this one thing, now I'm gonna lose like the keys to the car and they're gonna like I'm gonna end up in a home somewhere. Like it's all of that worst case scenario meets worst case scenario.
Mhm.
And then on the other side, you have adult children who are saying, I don't really want to deal with the fact that like this person who raised me now might need the help from me. And so there's just this avoidance of the conversation, and that's what grows. And I think that the money piece is really hard because there has been so much in the news or, big stories because that's what sells, right? That's why people watch the
Yeah.
news of someone like getting moved into a home and then they lose all of their money. But the vast majority of people that I had the opportunity to work with, I would say everyone that I had the opportunity to work with, it was, I don't know how to start this conversation. I know we need to have this conversation. And so one of the things that we are going to do with Dovetail is really have the start of that. Um, and so people can start to address it in ways where it doesn't feel like you're jumping off the high dive. It feels like you're easing your way into the pool very, very slowly. But you can't avoid it. And it's just how terrible do you want it to be, or how realistic and smooth do you want it to be?
Yeah. And I love that's what you're focusing on because I feel like that's a huge problem is that families or whatever systems, people who have these closed systems, like struggle with having difficult conversations. So they push it off, push it off, push it off. And then comes that time and they're like, I wish I had this difficult conversation 10 years ago so that I would be prepared. And so I love that you'll be focusing on the stuff like money and talking through things with caregivers and their families or whoever they're taking care of to help them feel prepared. And like you said, not feel like they're learning to swim just by throwing them in the pool immediately.
Yeah, yeah, it is so important, and I call it generational resentment. I have seen the outcome of people avoiding the conversation and they are now standing outside of the hospital room and the decisions cannot be avoided anymore in terms of what this person would want for care, what this person would want for if they couldn't go home, whose home would they go to?
Mhm.
People that avoided having any adaptations done to their home as they started to have issues with balance or vision or whatever, now they're going to return home to a home that has been gone through by a construction crew, right? So the further out ahead of things you can get, that now you're talking about picking out your own grab bars versus someone coming into your space and making these decisions for you.
Mhm.
And then on the other end of like, what do you want for care? What is too much for you to be at home? What is too much for you in terms of what you want to ask your kids or whoever is going to help you for? Because when it comes down to it, and you may no longer be able to make these decisions, now you're talking about multiple people who are saying, I know what they want, I know what they want. And then that's what splinters
Right.
families apart. And it's all so much of it could be not necessarily avoided, but so much of it could be eased into by having conversations when the stakes aren't so high.
Hmm. Absolutely. That's a great point. Like the mindset of being proactive rather than reactive, like being
Mhm.
able to kind of prevent these problems before they become a problem ultimately, which I think is so important as these statistics that you shared earlier continue to kind of shape. And I imagine those numbers will get smaller in terms of like not smaller as in it being more rare, but just more people facing it.
Mhm.
Like you said, the 1 in 3 statistic, maybe one day it could become 1 in 2 people are a caregiver. So yeah, I think it's really great that you're focusing on this world. And for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with Dovetail yet, like let's have about you walk us through like exactly what it offers and what you've been focusing on building throughout the past few months, or actually probably longer than that since you officially launched in July.
I know that's where the timeline gets fuzzy, right? Because I feel like so often people are like, "Tell me the date," and I'm like, "Oh, I don't
I
know."
can't
Like
pick one.
this, yeah, this might have been a 3 a.m. idea. This might have been a March idea. I don't know. Yeah, so Dovetail is really designed to be. Um, it's designed around it's a notes-based system, uses a calendar to integrate everything and share it. So
Mhm.
there's a couple of features that I think are really important to point out for people on the caregiving side is that, or any user of it, is that it is notes are shared among users. Not the platform is shared among users. So a lot of apps that focus on caregiving or specifically parenting, really you get a bucket of information and then you have a bunch of people that have access to that entire bucket. And on my end, it was really important to start with a scaffolding versus a bucket.
Mhm.
Because with that, you can do a couple of different things. You can really get granular on how you control the information that goes out. And it also allows you to do the work of care logistics management for more than one person at a time. And so
Mhm.
that was really an essential function is I don't need to share with my babysitter my kids' information from the pediatrician. That's not essential. But if I do have, one of them is going somewhere or they have a bunch of information that I want to leave for the kid's babysitter, I want to be able to write it all down and send it over to them so that when they show up at my house, I don't have to do a 45-minute walkthrough of like all this, that, and the other thing. I can say, hey, do you have any questions?
Mhm.
Everything's here if you need it. And so with Dovetail, we're really trying to eliminate so much of that overlap between email and text message and group chats and all of those pieces. So you can share individual notes so you can get really specific on the information that gets shared. You have a shared calendar. The calendar is one that you can push and pull information from. So it's not like a lot of platforms will have a calendar that looks like a calendar, but it doesn't interact like a calendar.
Mhm.
And that's where we're trying to say, okay, I don't want you to update the calendar in the app and then the calendar here and then all of these pieces. Let's see how many things we can actually combine into one so that if you only had one tool to use, would you be able to get all the things done that you need to do there? Um, so there's that. There is the grocery component because really one of the hardest things that we do as a human is feeding ourselves and feeding other
Mhm.
people. And it's such an underemphasized stressor in our life, especially like if you have someone that has dietary restrictions, if you have someone that has access issues, if you whatever it is. So there's a emphasis there on we actually have a GPT that is being loaded into it right now where you can ask for, you know, 4 meals, whatever it is, a certain number of meals for this person, lunch and dinner. These are their dietary restrictions. These are the things they don't like. Create a menu and a grocery list, and then you can
Oh,
send it to the
amazing.
grocery list. Yeah. I mean, it's that stuff, right? Like where you say to
Mhm.
yourself, you're driving in your car and you're like, my gosh, I wish I could just say like make me 5 dinners for such and such that has this, this, and this, and keep that.
Mhm.
You can also we're integrated with Amazon, Whole Foods, Walmart, and Target, and you can complete tasks within the app. So one of the problems is that, you stop and you say, "Oh, I need to remember to do this, this, and this." You open one of those apps, you put something in there, but you forget about it.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden you just have this open tab ticker tape phenomenon going on. So with Dovetail, you can go into any of those integrated apps, and we're adding more, but you can go into any of those integrated apps, load up the shopping cart, and then go back to the note where you had a list of things and check that off so you know that that's done. It's just this idea of not having to check in 7 different places
Seriously, yeah.
for the same thing.
Yeah. Which that in itself is a big problem because it's like it seems like there's an app for everything now. I mean, I was talking about this the other day as an example. Now like parking spaces have apps. Like if you go to park somewhere, you
Mm.
have to download an app to pay for the space. But not every city uses the same parking space app. So now you have like 4 parking space apps on your phone. And so I love that Dovetail is like kind of bringing all these different apps into one place so if people don't have to remember where exactly they're doing things in and they can just only go to that one source of truth and not have to worry about everything else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just feel like there's so many. Technology is great. It's wonderful. It helps us be faster. It helps us do things better. But once we get to a point where there's so much technology that is layered and it doesn't speak to each other, then what are we optimizing for, right? Are we
Mm-hmm.
optimizing for ourselves or are we optimizing for the company that's telling us that we're being optimized?
Yeah, that is a very good point. And one thing I'm curious about too, in terms of integration, is how it might integrate or potentially in the future integrate with any like doctors' portals that might be coming up as people are getting like their information from their visits or medications or testing, whatever it might be, like those lab results. I'm curious to hear like how Dovetail will also support that too, because of course that is an important piece of caregiving and the health journey moving forward.
Yes. Oh, I love that question. I feel like I sent you that question. It was like, hey, ask me this. Because it's such a big part of it is, I've got 4 kids and I don't know how many healthcare portals and doctors' offices and the dentist and the reminders and all of that stuff. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't, uh, even when you get into specialists and stuff like that. Yes, the short answer is yes. Right now, the version that we released in July is direct consumer, really looking at tackling those day-to-day logistics. It was built out, it was overbuilt for safety and privacy
Hmm.
because the information relates to children potentially,
Right.
and where people are going to have, if you have any photos, if you have any information like that on there you can effectively create your own EHR, electronic health record, in there. So if you have someone that is taking a parent to doctor's appointments, you can create a note and have a running list of that, of what is going on there, right? So someone can look back, they can say, I took mom to the doctor, but last time she went and saw cardiology with my brother, And then the doctor that you're going to see now hasn't gotten the information from cardiology. And so instead of spending that 15, 20 minutes of FaceTime that you get with a specialist, texting your brother or calling your brother or saying, "Hey, what did they say last time?" You
Mhm.
can now go back on the calendar and say, "Okay, the appointment was here." And you can either have a screenshot of a test result that was shared, you can have a note, you can have questions that cardiology asked and wanted to send through and follow up with. So
Yeah.
you can create that. The next phase of this is to actually create that. It is to create a healthcare platform that is specifically for this because
Mhm.
like you said, we've got portals for days, we've got updates for days, we've got all of these things that are coming back and forth. And just the password management and the platform management and the who gets what from here when is so inefficient
Yeah.
and that's where the clinical part comes in is that you know that you have to use this software because the hospital is telling you that you have to use the software and you know that you're handing it to someone and it is overwhelming. And so how do we take that where you're meeting the hospital's requirements but you're also not asking someone to learn another thing. So that is coming down the line for us. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it's a much bigger build to put that into place. And so
Yeah.
the tentative date for that is end of 2026. We'll have that online.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, that is so
Yes.
exciting. And it, like you said, I mean, just portals for days and all these different things people have to
Mhm.
juggle. But also the point that you mentioned too is that someone might have more than one caregiver, like multiple siblings. So being able to again have that one source of truth that all siblings can access will prevent things from falling through the cracks or like a game of telephone, someone misinterprets something. And I think just being able to have that one place that anyone who needs access to it can, which I think is really great. And just from hearing what you've been talking about too, I feel like a big benefit without it being like a true feature is like the mental load capacity. Like I feel like
Mm.
as women and as caregivers, like mental load is huge. Like remembering to do something and having all this stuff on your plate. And it sounds like from what you've shared that Dovetail is really helping to support that and take the load off a little bit for people who are in those caregiver positions.
Absolutely. All day. Because what happens is that, like I said, the person who gets the phone call in the emergency room, they become the default caregiver, whether or
Mm-hmm.
not they want to be. You know, they're the person who carries the information. They're the person who checks for the updates. They're the person that might have all the passwords. But in this system, there is no default caregiver. So all of the information lives externally from the person who would potentially become or would most likely become the default caregiver. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all in one place. So the idea of like, well, she knows the answer or he knows the answer, I don't know the answer, let me ask them and check in with them doesn't exist anymore, right? If the note has been shared with you, if the record that you're creating has been shared with you, you have access to everything in that stream of consciousness, which means that it doesn't apply anymore. And I also, because this is just my own thing, I also put in there that if you share a note with someone, when you share a note with someone, they get an email, but you as the sender also have an icon for them, for whoever that contact is in your flock. I call it your flock. You create a flock for this person and this person. You have an icon that appears with that note, so you know that you've sent that to them because so often
Mm-hmm.
so many people that I talk to are like, I don't even know if I sent that. Or you get the person who's like, oh, I missed the email. Like
Yeah.
when they open their Dovetail, it's right there. Like
Yeah.
receipts are essential, especially because I think you can run into the person who means well and is doing well and they say, "Oh, just send it to me, just send it to me, share that with me, whatever." And you keep sharing it with them, but they're like, "Oh, I just don't get it." Like it's there. We're making
Yeah.
that part really
No more
specific.
excuses.
No more excuses. And I mean, that is really addressing that mental load. Is like,
Hmm.
you asked me to share this, I shared this. I have the receipt in the form of this little icon, and you have it when you open your Dovetail. So if you don't have it, you have an open Dovetail.
Yeah.
And that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. I have done the work that needs to get done. And it's really that updating in real time gives people an opportunity to say, I have done this. and now it's shared across to whoever you're sharing it to, but that you're not that I've got to remind, I've got to remember, I've got to do that. It's trying to move from idea to execution as quickly as possible without getting stuck in the back and forth that is just
Oh
it's
yeah.
the deep end.
Never-ending communication loops for sure. Yeah, I think that is
Exactly.
huge. And I know you mentioned that a big part of what inspired wanting to build Dovetail was that you had started your own practice. And so I'm curious, do you still have the practice? Are you focused solely on Dovetail? I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I do still have the practice. It's called Home Field Advantage. And it's still up and running. I have just opened up my calendar, which is again, love the timing of this question, but I've opened up my calendar again with the fall, and everyone going back into school. And so I meet with people virtually. There's a couple of different ways. It's meeting peop with people virtually to navigate these questions of so and so just got a new diagnosis, or I think that things are in a place where I'm not necessarily sure that we can do this on our own or manage this on our own, and we don't know what it's going to look like. So there's
Hmm.
that. Then there's also, we have a family meeting that is scheduled because we know that we all need to talk about this, but nobody wants to be the one to blink first. And so
Yeah.
I volunteer myself as tribute to be the one who stands in the middle of the room and says, "Hey, we have to talk about money." It has nothing to do with me. Like I am not a loaded like subject in this room, but it's just someone's got to be the one to blink and say,
Hmm.
let's consider all of these options. And so I think that in my experience, when I did this in person, people really feel nobody wants to be the one that kicks that off because nobody wants to be the one where people are like, well, they just asked because of this. So
Right.
I volunteer. And then the other part of that is the third arm of Home Field is helping companies set up caregiver support, whatever that means to them, whether it is caregiver support groups in the office, whether it means liaising with caregiver support in the community, establishing what a policy and procedure might look like for that, as having
Hmm.
conversations around education for managers, employees in how to bridge that gap. You know, a lot of people end up leaving the workforce. It's like 67, sixty-six
Yeah.
percent of people end up leaving the workforce because they don't feel like they can talk about their roles and responsibilities as caregivers outside of work. But the roles and responsibilities of caregivers outside of work require a lot of time and energy, and people either end up downshifting or leaving. And
Hmm.
for employers, you don't want to lose someone to that. But if you don't know that that's what's going on, you can't prevent that. So it's really in service of trying to meet these caregivers where they're at and say, what would be effective for your company so that you can reduce that drop off of employees.
Oh, I love that. And then I feel like that's the perfect complementary leg that will then lead people to Dovetail, like being able to have that caregiver support. And now you're like, I can present you with this platform that is exactly what you need.
Yes, yes. I mean, really, like, there is no care infrastructure in this country, and
Mhm.
the long-term care system in the US is built on the backs of family caregivers, right? Because
Yeah.
if you know somebody who is unable to access services, if they're unable to have services be outsourced for them, and you can't hire someone if it's a preference, if it's a physical inability, like that services aren't available because in 2023, there were 1.8 million healthcare job vacancies, right? If you
Wow.
can't find someone to do the thing that you need to do, you are the person who is going to do that because you're not going to drop the ball when it comes to a loved one. Like, we're not talking about buying a new something. We're talking about someone who can no longer take care of themselves.
Right.
And so how do we navigate that?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is a big point. And one thing I'm curious about too, because a lot of founders that listen to the show, and I've also been on the show themselves, are like you, having another business or another job and also balancing their startup. And so I'm curious to hear how you juggle both of them and if you have a system or process for being able to make sure that you dedicate time to each of them.
Yeah, I think uh I will say, like, I don't know who is listening to the show, but I am 100% sure that childcare is a component of that. So
Mhm.
that is maybe not necessarily talked about as much or as often as it should be, but my ability to dedicate time to the business has been impacted by whether or not I have young kids, I have kids home with me, whatever. And so that has ramped up as my kids have gotten older, my ability to dedicate time, blocking time in terms of like when I work on different things during the week and being really strict around those boundaries, which is really hard because I think that sometimes, especially when I am doing something that approaches a problem in all these different directions, it really feels like you just kind of check and refresh your email over and over again, and you can do that for 8 hours, but you're not actually getting stuff done. So it's it is getting time to do the work and taking advantage of the time that I have to do when I have to do. So that's yes, not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah, but as you shared, just like being intentional with your time, right? Like there's only so
Mhm.
many hours in a day, especially when you have kids a part of the equation. So I think that's a good reminder for everyone to just make sure that you're using the time that you do have to the best of your advantage.
hmm Yeah, and I also think too, like there's so many times where I have, I'm like driving someone somewhere and you're like, "Oh, the thing I was thinking about, you have all of these ideas." So having a place to put all of that is really helpful because then I feel like you're not you're not always feeling like if you're doing one thing, you should be doing another thing, but that you have a space and a place for it to go, so that when you have time to do that, you can get to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm also curious to hear too, is Dovetail funded or is it something you're thinking about in the future? I'm curious to hear how you've been able to fund this product that you're building.
Yes, Dovetail is not currently funded. I am going to open a round this fall. It is, like I mentioned before, building the infrastructure for the hospital. Um, Caregiver interaction is a huge build, and so we are going to open a round to help offset those costs and then help grow the platform from where it is right now. It has been bootstrapped. It's been bootstrapped off the back of the work that I did. Dovetail was originally started as a paper-based product.
Mhm.
And so selling those products allowed me to pay for the digital conversion and the build out of that. And then yeah, we'll open our round very quickly.
Oh, so exciting.
It is
And I love,
exciting.
yeah, and I love that you mentioned that you've been bootstrapping it because I sometimes feel like I wonder that maybe some founders just assume that they have to go immediately to open a
Mhm.
round, but that's not always the case. They could do something like what you're doing, bootstrapping it first until you get to the point where you do need to bring in those external sources. And so I would love to hear just advice that you would give to any founder who's doing something similar, who is bootstrapping for now, and what you've learned along the way that may be helpful for them to consider.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's helpful. The reason that I have bootstrapped it, I think a lot of times that doesn't really get shared. The reason I
Mm,
did bootstrap it is because I was really, really, really confident and set on what I wanted the platform and the product to look like. Not necessarily visually, but I knew what I wanted it to be able to do.
mhm,
And I think that had I brought in investment early, that, then it becomes a group project. And
mhm,
then it becomes, well, this is what I think, and this is what I think. And what I really wanted was to build the thing that I knew was needed based on 14 plus years of experience. And then once that was up and rolling and people were using it and we were having feedback come in and adding features and all of that stuff, then that felt like there was enough of a nucleus to say, okay, now when we bring in what is outside investment going to do for this? Um, and it is, again, it's growth, right? It is helping to build this next version of this, but the next version of this is based on this piece here. So
mhm,
that's why I did it. And then the other reason that I did it is that I started designing this during the pandemic, and I had four kids at home with me. So I had two in school. I had a preschooler and I had a newborn. And I knew that if I got into a fundraising funded situation, that has a different level of expectation in terms of dedication of time and hours and all of that stuff. And I wasn't at that place. And so I didn't want to put off building it until I could be at that place because I thought, well, it's going to take me a while to learn, right? I learned sales and I learned marketing and I learned Canva and I learned platforms and I learned all of that stuff. I did not develop this on my own. So I don't want anyone to think that like I just, whipped up a coding education. No, that's not like outsource all day long on that one because that's well beyond
Know
my
what you don't
pay
know.
grade. Know what you don't know. Be very confident in what you don't know. Um, but that I wanted, I think that as a founder, it's also really important that you understand what you're asking of people when you bring them on, right? And if you're
Hmm.
like, I need to just hire a salesperson right off the bat, well, what are you going to ask them to do? I
Yeah.
need to hire a marketing person. Okay, well, what are you going to ask them to do? They can have all sorts of great and wonderful ideas, but are you just building a team of people that are kind of going to go with whatever it is, or do you need to have a cohesive thought idea around where the direction of this and how those people can add value to it versus saying, okay, sales is your problem and I'm just over
Hmm.
here designing things.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I love especially what you shared at the beginning of that, which is that by being able to bootstrap it, like you only had to get permission from yourself, like having
Mhm.
full control over that. You didn't have to, like, you're answering to another investor or kind of like drifting away from what your original vision was. You were really able to stay true to it. And I think that is like a really good point that you mentioned, not many people talk about enough.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that's if you're always feeling like for me, if I would have felt like I was always kind of on my heels if I went into a situation where I was meeting with a potential investor or meeting with an investor if I had closed around that I would always feel like I was deferring to the experts versus
Hmm.
becoming an expert in this product and focusing, it having that bootstrap experience allowed me to interview over 100 caregivers. It allowed me to slowly think about what was going to make sense here, there, and everywhere and maybe make changes based on those interviews so that when it came time to actually start building this thing, we were much farther along in that process because we weren't just slamming something together and then saying, okay, tell me what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Great point. And one of my favorite questions to ask our guests, and I'm excited to hear your response to this, is someone they would like to give a shout out to in tech right now. So it could be someone who's another founder, VC, ecosystem builder. I would love to hear who's really inspiring you in this moment.
Um, Let me see. I think Um, Katie Christophic is the one that I would like to shout out to. She has been a guest on my podcast. I have been a guest on her podcast. She is doing incredible work to help build a resource for caregivers. Her podcast talks about the caregiving journey and what that means to people and is bringing light to a lot of those conversations. And she's also building a whole resource for family caregivers because it seems to be, and she and I have talked a lot about this. It seems to be this baptism by fire, but the lessons don't translate to other people. So it's
Mhm.
you become an expert in caregiving, but then there's not really a place to put that information once your caregiving journey ends. And so she's doing a really beautiful job of building. It's called the Careful List, and it's a Careful List podcast. And she is doing a really beautiful job of helping to bridge that for other generations so people aren't feeling like they've got to start from scratch when they jump into this.
Yeah, I love it. That's a good shout out. And I love that it also so closely complements what you're doing with Dovetail.
Yeah, yeah, it's lovely. And that again, it's another thing, right? Is like if you have all of these spaces and this complementary information, It's not pie. Caregiving is not pie. Everyone needs it. Everyone at some point in time is going to need it, but everyone doesn't necessarily need it in the same way. So how can we
Hmm.
make the information accessible instead of this? Like, there's no scarcity in caregiving, right? Like, people are
Right.
going to it's going to come from anywhere. So if Dovetail is like what speaks to someone, that's great. If another app is what speaks to someone, that's great. What I care about in the end is that we don't have 113 million people in this country who are feeling like a fish out of water every day and feeling like they are burning the candle at both ends and in the middle because they're trying to figure out how to do this. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, great perspective. I love that.
Thank you.
Ashley, this has been such a fun episode, and I've so appreciated having you come on to share what you've been building with Dovetail. And now I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online because they'd like to connect.
Yeah, so you can find me. I'm the most active on LinkedIn, just Ashley Blackington there. My Dovetail.app on Instagram will get you to the Dovetail information. If you want everything all in one place, ashleyblackington.com. I put off building a portfolio website for a very long time, but realized it's a very efficient way to point people in a lot of different directions. So if you go on there, you can also book a call. Like if you're someone that just has questions and want to chat for like 15 minutes of where do I even start and where do I go, I'm available because OT is, we're not a widely accessible service, although we have wide-ranging utility. So trying to
Mhm.
close that up as well.
Amazing. And I will include all those places in the show notes that our listeners can easily find you here, there, and everywhere. But thank you so much again for coming on this week's episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.